Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Another week of probing to find some sanity in the world. This is Rick Wagner getting it right here on Kansas KGLN. And we're all over the place. We appreciate you guys joining us. I can tell you that. And we can also catch up with us on the Internet, where you can listen in if you're not able to be within our broadcasting radius. And we put this up as a podcast as well that you can find by going to Podbean, Apple. I think it's on TuneIn and 2 or 3 other things. Just ask for the Rick Wagner Show. It should pop up. I should check that before I start telling everybody. It did before, but you never know. There's a very strange world out there in the interwebs. You never know what's going to happen next. Say, before I forget, I wanted to bring something to everybody's attention. If you get a chance, go look around until you can see that body cam video of that officer that is being hoisted up on the roof with the would-be assassin at the Trump rally. It's pretty interesting. We got so many different versions of what was going on there. I wasn't even exactly sure what the official version was or what any version was. So seeing it was actually pretty helpful. And you got to be able to find it if you go on the Internet. But the New York Post had it a couple days ago, and I made a note of it. But, you can just put body cam footage, officer, Trump rally, or Trump assassination attempt. And it might pull up 2 or 3. But what you want is, it starts out with one of the officers who all you see, it's really kind of funny in a way, and it's because it kind of brings you into a certain place. He has his hands in front of himself, laced, and the other officer is standing in front of him, and he puts his foot, as we know many people do, into the other officer's hands, and they try and hoist him up on the roof. Then the video, at least the one I saw, cuts to the body cam on the officer on the roof as his little camera comes up, and it looks to me like he's probably wearing the body cam a little high on his chest. And you see pretty much the outline of this dude up on the roof, and if you look carefully, you can kind of see that he is points a gun back at this cop, right? Well, that's not a good place to be, especially when you're just hanging on the edge of the roof. What are you supposed to do there? So he comes down, and then this is where everybody can argue about what happened, or should have happened. The officer then runs out around the edge of the building and starts trying to warn people that there's a shooter on the roof. Now, should he have been hoisted back up there again and, try to take him out himself? I don't know. I don't know. I just don't. As soon as I say one way or another, I change my mind. I see what the officer was saying. He's doing something. There's people in the area. I need to tell them. It's sad that the officer had to climb up there himself to find out what was going on. A lot of you have seen the video from people just standing out by that building, which was not very far away, about 130, 140 yards away from the podium where President Trump was giving his address. This guy crawling along the top of the roof does not look like something that you would say, oh, that's probably normal. No, it's not. It doesn't look normal at all. And we're still not 100% clear from the Secret Service, or anybody else for that matter, how the weapon was brought in. Remember, we heard that it was brought in and stashed behind the air conditioner, and then he got it when he got up on top of the air conditioner. When I saw, the compressor was on the ground. I don't know if that's what they mean. And then there were some people saying, well, he brought it in his backpack and he assembled it. Well, they don't know anything about AR-15s. He didn't assemble it. He had a collapsible stock on it, which of course it paralyzes liberals with fear, because any weapon with a collapsible stock is just incredibly dangerous. It doesn't matter what it is a weapon of war, and when you see one, even if you're in a sporting goods store, you should immediately dive for cover. That's their idea. Certainly it's Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate now on the Democrat side, seems to feel that way if you look at his remarks on gun control and so forth. So he probably had it collapsed up, but in my experience, most likely the barrel length on that thing, it has to be probably 16 inches unless he's carrying an illegally short firearm, and I don't think he was. So you got 16 inches there, and let's see, you got another, I'm just doing it in my head, maybe another, collapsed, that whole thing might be another 18 inches. So I don't know what kind of backpack he would be having. It didn't look like it was, they didn't say it was a folding stock, so, which would have made it even smaller. But you don't see many folding stocks on ARs. But they don't seem to be too clear about how it got in there. That's a disturbing thing, too, isn't it? I mean, how long were we supposed to wait for this stuff? We have video from other people all over the place. I mean, it's not real clear, I'll give you that. It's hard to see exactly what he's doing. You see him crawling and he carries something, and, but you don't see when it first appears. Well, you see when it first appears, but you don't know where it might have been produced from. But you would think they would have a little more knowledge about that. Apparently the guy rode his bicycle there. I mean, is that like... I mean, I guess I'm looking for some sort of Day of the Jackal kind of, very very convoluted and complicated attempts here. And this doesn't seem to be that at all. This kid rides his bicycle up there with a rangefinder, like you can use for shooting or golf, and somehow gets his AR up on the roof with him. Everybody sees him. He goes crawling along this roof that it's about a 4-1 roof pitch. I mean, a 1-4 roof pitch. So it's about 1 foot for every 4 feet that it seems to go off there. We still aren't real clear about what's going on. It's got cameras everywhere. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Well, I'm becoming one, perhaps, but I'm terribly afraid that it is just incredible incompetence that we're seeing here. And perhaps a piece of it that the higher-ups in the organization, the Secret Service, just didn't much care. They gave Trump just the bare minimum that they could give him. This was the first time, according to some reports, and I almost hesitate to say this because you come into this thing, some reports, because some of them say it, some of them don't, that this was the first time, certainly in a long time, or maybe the only time, that they've had counter snipers on the roof when he had an outdoor event. I can hardly believe that. I mean, wouldn't that be clearly someplace where you had counter snipers? I mean, or at least maybe somebody up there, I don't know, with one of those telescopes that they used in the 1890s, that you pull out and take a look at. Somebody taking a look around up there. But apparently not. I mean, we can't get anything straight out of the Secret Service. We saw Cheadle, the woman who has since resigned, although she originally said she wouldn't resign. I'm surprised she did, actually. We all know that no matter how incompetent you are, you never leave a Biden or Obama administration. And the guy that came up behind, I had some hope for him. I said, okay, this guy seems like he's pulled together. He's high and tight haircut. He's this and that. And then he starts talking and tap dancing around it, prevaricating, getting upset when people are asking him questions. And then you realize, oh, no. He either doesn't know what's going on, or more precisely, he's in the middle of some of it, denying some coverage, or there's something going on with him that he's somehow tied to this lapse in security. And then it just stays that way. I mean, Congress can have all kinds of hearings. What's interesting to me is that the January 6th hearings, of course, by that august body, that of course, it was both sides had an opportunity to participate. I mean, Nancy Pelosi picked who would, but it still is both sides. Their subpoenas and everything, you could land in a clink if you didn't show up and testify, and it went on and on and on. Here, the Republicans investigating this pretty serious event, having a hard time getting any info, getting anybody to show up. If that doesn't send a message about what's going on in Washington, and probably in a lot of state capitals too, for that matter, where the administrative state is so entrenched and it becomes opposed to certain things. You don't see it very often because you only see it when you start pushing against it. And when you start pushing against it, you start seeing this stuff. You realize, I can't get information. And the information I can get is vague. And if it's not vague, I'm not sure it's correct because they'll issue 2 or 3 versions of something. And then they'll ask for more time to do an investigation, which often is a clear signal that we would like to just hold off on this until people have forgotten about it. They'll release some written report with 126 pages of mumbo jumbo, and hopefully it'll all go away. It's a disturbing trend in government these days. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. We're back. I'm beginning to think that I look at some of my topics, and I think this was stuff I would have thought was conspiratorial radio a few years ago. Now it just seems mainstream. Maybe I should start doing a show like Art Bell. Some of you remember Art Bell. He used to be on in the evenings, night, like overnight, like midnight. Art Bell had a great show if you wanted to listen to things about really way out there theories and shadow people, UFOs, cattle mutilations, Sasquatch, anything like that. And he would get some really interesting people on. And it would be one of those shows you'd listen to and you'd think, I never looked at it that way. I mean, I don't believe it, but I never looked at it. Although one time, and I may have told this story before, I still remember I came back into town from being out of town at some sort of event I had to go to or class. And it was late at night. They came back in one of the office cars, and I was gassing it up. And at that time, the gas pumps we shared at the city were down by the river here in Colorado. And it was dark. Nobody was around, and the river wasn't that far away. And I had the door open while I was out putting gas in the car to return it back to the fleet. And Art had on a guy who was in some sort of Bigfoot expert, and they were discussing these calls that he had recorded. So he was playing these cries, these Bigfoot cries that he'd recorded or allegedly recorded. And I was standing there, and there was putting gas in the car, and out of the car all these howls start coming out of the car. And it was just late enough at night. I started to look around, down by the river there. I mean, is it going to call somebody up here? Something? Is it going to come this way? It was pretty funny. It's interesting. It doesn't take much sometimes to get your hackles raised, as they say. We're kind of programmed to protect ourselves, and when weird stuff happens, we don't have to believe that it's happening. We just have to believe that it might be happening, and your body wants to say, let's get out of here. But he had a great show on at night, and then he started turning it over to someone else. I can't remember the guy's name. Some of you may. And it was still pretty good if you were up that late for some reason, because it was just interestingly creepy, and a lot of it. The shadow people were the one that got me. He'd have 3 or 4 shows on that. I never quite understand what it was. And the guys he'd be talking to, some of them were like, they were very, let's say they were very convinced about what they were talking about. And some of it was kind of interesting. It was all kind of interesting. Maybe we just do that. Stop talking about politics and what's going on in the world, because it might be, we might be better off, for gosh sakes. We'd probably be happier. I mean, if you follow the news too much anymore, it can't make you very happy. I mean, who's happy with the news anymore, do you think? Do you think maybe the far left progressives are happy with it? They don't seem to be. They keep trying to burn the cities down and this and that. And they seem to be getting their way, so why are they so upset? But yeah, they don't seem very happy with it either. So no one seems to be enjoying the news and what's going on in the world. Partly because, if you've been paying any attention, the world is, in a bad spot right now. It's that fourth turning thing. Now, Viktor Orban, who I may talk about in the next segment, gave a talk, and he's the president of Hungary, and he's a conservative guy, so he is obviously disliked greatly by the Western media. But he has a lot of interesting things and good things to say. And he has an observation about what's going on in the world today. If I can think about it, I have it saved someplace. In the next segment, we'll talk about it, because it's actually very interesting. You just feel like that there's a moment in time where one thing starts happening, and there is the domino effect, to bring that up from the old Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. It does feel like that as one thing happens, it causes another thing to happen. The Middle East, where there's always problems, always been a tripwire. I mean, it's even hard to sort out what's going on. Like we talked about last week, we have waiting for Iran to do whatever they're going to do, mad at Israel because of Israel's actions, and which, by the way, I think are probably pretty correct, but then everybody can have their own opinion. And then we have Turkey over there threatening, first they're threatening Israel, about if they attack any more of these, any more of the Arab states, and nothing's come of that so far. But and then they were saying that they would consider attacking any Arab states that joined with Israel. What does that have to do with it? What are you doing out there? First of all, how is it your business? We have more of an interest in the Middle East through Israel than Turkey does. Turkey has more interest in Iran and Iraq, and they're much closer. I mean, obviously Iran is right there on their border, and they both have a problem there with the Kurds, who would like to have their own state and be left alone by both of these maniacs, and it's not happening, and they spend a lot of time trying to track them down. So why are you reaching out to the other side of Africa to impose your will on it? Is it just because you want to feel like the big boy on the block, or what the story is? It's getting to be very weird. I know weird has been turned into a strange term all by itself by the left, but it is. It's turned into these kind of situations where you have a hard time sorting out where the national interest is. I mean, what's your national interest in this exactly? How does it benefit you in some way? You start taking Turkey versus Israel, it's a pretty hard one. Now, we do know that a lot of that area where Israel is at, especially, pretty much north and east of it, was part of the old Ottoman Empire, and it was yanked away from the Ottomans after World War I, and then, of course, we had Turkey come on, which, is a strange name to most of us here in the West, but it's, a derivation of the leader that kind of solidified everything, Ataturk. And so you see, maybe they just feel like that's still partly theirs. Maybe it's sort of like the way the Russians feel like that everything that was in the Soviet Union is still really theirs. Putin's at least smart about it. I mean, he doesn't want some of the crazy stands. I mean, he wants to go after places that he feels like he can get something out of. And of course, it doesn't do him any good to bomb the Ukraine, for instance, into oblivion. What's the point of that? I mean, ostensibly, he started off with trying to, and this is a very familiar, if it starts sounding familiar to you, sort of a pretense, that Russian-speaking peoples in the Ukraine, who in the area of the Donbass and, of course, the Crimea, they want to be joined back to Russia, Mother Russia. They want to come back to that because they speak that language more fluently than they do the Ukrainian variation. I'm not exactly sure that anybody really had like a plebiscite or anything. I thought that might be a good idea. I said, well, okay, here's an idea. Let's have some kind of vote and see, if part of this country you're talking about wants to go back to being part of Russia, which I always confuse with the Soviet Union because I don't think it's much different. And see what they say. That's not so good. I mean, it's better to just decide, just to sit in the Kremlin and decide that these people really want to be part of this. My favorite quote is from, I can't remember which one of the satellite nations it was after World War II. If it was Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia. But Stalin said that when he moved in there and sort of just took them over, he said that he felt a great silent wish on the part of the people there to be incorporated into the Soviet Union. I mean, well, I'll give the guy, he's got some, he has some guts in there, So I felt a great silent wish. Sitting here in the Kremlin, I just feel the people crying out to me. No one else feels that way, but and to get it done, I had to send like military in there, but still, they wanted to be part of the Soviet Union. This is what tyrants do, my friends. This is how they operate. We're going to talk a little bit about tyrants in the next segment if I have some time, because I posted something on the website at rickwagnershow.com. I posted a bit of Aristotle on there on tyrants, which I thought was extremely on point, especially for something that was written, let me think, 2,500 and change years ago. It's pretty much on point. Yeah, Aristotle, he didn't have a cell phone or anything. He's still pretty smart. And some of his observations about politics, like we talk about here, these observations we have, I keep a sheet of quotes from the Roman historian Tacitus here because they have so many pithy things to say. And if you really start wanting to get into feeling like it's deja vu all over again, You start reading some of the ancient historians like Thucydides, who's probably, between Thucydides and Herodotus, they're really the first real historians, in the Persian War and, that sort of thing. And if you start reading their observations about what people are doing and why they're doing them, you realize that it's just the same. People have not changed. Because they're riding up on a horse with a leopard skin thrown over it as a saddle, they have the same kind of outlook on life as somebody that pulls up in a Chevy and gets out. They're not changed that much. Human nature is not. We kid ourselves to think that human nature has bound forward to where we're just so much more civilized. The veneer of civilization falls away from humanity very quickly. And you can see that any time that there's an uprising. People who are good people stay pretty good. They may get desperate, but they stay pretty good. People that aren't very good, they go bad fast. Yeah, it doesn't take long. We'll be back. Oh, yes, folks, we're back here. I like to see myself as a knight without armor in a savage land. Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good, frankly. Nothing like blowing yourself up out of proportion. Well, everybody else does it. If I could do it big enough, I guess I got to be a politician. So let's look at some more news here that you probably didn't hear about that was interesting to know. Now, the United Nations, we all know what a tremendous organization that is. It was the springboard out of the mind of good old, yes, think about it for a second. Who was it? Woodrow Wilson. Yeah, that's right, because it started off the League of Nations. And what does that tell you, knowing what we know about Woodrow Wilson? Well, that it's an administrative body. It wants to control, administer, and have sort of a bureaucratic influence over everything, and just worm its way into every aspect of everything that's done. And of course, since it involves a lot of nation states, it's got a lot of graft. So there's almost nothing about it that surprises you, but I think we all have kind of a Pollyanna view and think that, well, it must be doing some good. It might be. I don't know where, but it might be. So this last week, in part of their investigation that was demanded by Israel and some other folks into what was going on in their organization, and the organization that's part of the UN we're talking about is UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA. And now these folks are supposed to help distribute relief materials, food, so forth, and stuff like that, to people who are suffering because of being in a war zone or something like that. Right? And they had to say that they had a report that found 9 employees of the United Relief Agency there taking part in the terrorist activities on October 7th and its aftermath. Okay, that's bad enough, except that it really doesn't tell the whole story. It's just sort of a dance out there to look like they did something and that only a small percentage of their people were doing it. That's really not the case. First of all, as you may know, and this is a story in the News Post that I got some of this stuff from, was, the United Nations and their branches don't even recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization. And I don't believe they recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. That means that they don't have any specific strictures against people from that organization or who relate to that organization from becoming part of theirs. I'm sure that works out just fine. You get local hires from these guys, I'm sure they're working for the common good. And this agency, like all these UN places, is much bigger than you would think it is. They have 13,000 employees in Gaza. UN employees. Employees is interesting. Who do you think's paying for that? Well, you mostly, because the United States pays the largest share of the UN's budget. Now, Israeli security documents found that 440 of that 13,000 are active in Hamas military operations, according to the New York Post. 2,000 are registered Hamas operatives. I always wonder about registered. I mean, is that like registered to vote? I'd like to be a Hamas terrorist. But I trust them when they say that. And another 7,000 have an immediate family member who is a Hamas terrorist. Okay, let's see, there's 13,000 employees in there. There's 9,000 that are either registered operatives with Hamas or have an immediate family member who is with Hamas. And then there's 440 that are active in Hamas military operations. As a percentage, that doesn't leave a lot of the folks there as being what we might call neutral or, excessively nonpartisan. That would be a good way to put it. July, it says, Israel sent the relief agency a list of 100 employees who were active in Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, including some of the teachers in the UNRWA who participated in the massacres and held Jews hostage in their homes. Okay, I'm going to say that again. According to this report from the New York Post, in July, Israel said that there was over 100 employees who were active in Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad in this organization. And that included teachers who participated in the massacres and held Jews hostage in their homes. All right. So the United States, by participating in this organization and giving them a large share of their funding, is helping that out. They also found that several facilities from this UN organization were being used by Hamas. However, when the UN started investigating it, they just could come up with 19 people that might be complicit in the October 7th massacre. And I looked at some of this stuff, and some of the stuff on these 19 people is just indisputable. It isn't like they had to dig it up. Like they didn't have an answer for it. And they say only 9 may have taken part in the attack. Just may. I think there's a lot of photographs of people. They probably are some fairly darning information about individuals that the UNRWA is just not considering. I mean, their employees and our teachers are not neutral. They are part of a organized effort to, push the Jewish state into the Mediterranean. We just have to stop this from happening. I mean, and we're essentially tied to this organization through the UN. And this agency encourages the United States to give money to them. However, Congress has, for now, blocked American funding after this. So we'll see how long that lasts, because we have a slender little majority in the House where the funding bills are set to come from. So hopefully that will stay. Now, how many times do we have to read things like this before we realize that these multinational organizations are almost always ineffective in the best of terms, harming things in the second best of terms, and are actively working against our aims in the world in the worst of terms? And we're paying for it. It also seems as though that whenever there is some sort of scandalous behavior on the part of the UN, like some of the misbehavior of United Nations troops in Africa and so forth like that, then it just doesn't get talked about very much. Not in our mainstream media. I know that will shock many of you, because as we know, they just tell us straight down the line, yes indeed. But it does, it's going on all the time. And that's because the globalist progressive kind of viewpoint looks for an organization to kind of work its way through. The Bilderberg organization and all of the big shots getting together and discussing how the world needs to be changed by them, that just quite isn't enough. They need something that is sort of a quasi-governmental organization. This is as close as you get. So the two things you see being worked on so much by progressives, and serious progressives, way out there in left field. Guys out there jumping around on the fence, left field, no mitt, nothing, just throwing their hands up in the air, are working in the European Union and the United Nations. Which, if you think about it, that is exactly where you would work if you were trying to accomplish this and you were them. Because these organizations have wormed their way into the nation-state's sovereignty. Excuse me, I can't speak today. They've managed to penetrate that, and for reasons that are hard to understand in some regards, many of the nations, particularly European nations lately, and us more and more, have turned over a lot of our sovereign rights, or at least our exclusionary rights, and say, hey, that's our business. Just stay out of it, to the UN and their sub-organizations for certain things, as though that's going to fix everything. Yeah, all we need is some UN peacekeepers here. Really? Where are they coming from? Now, at this point, and that's probably a good thing, the UN doesn't actually have an army. It has the ability to get peacekeepers in from member states' armed forces. So think about that for a minute. Where are they coming from? Putting peacekeepers in someplace, it would probably be an interesting idea to see exactly where those military peacekeepers are being drawn from. And they just give them the little blue beanies, and they paint their helmets blue, and all of a sudden they're the UN. I don't regard that as a very long-term solution to anything, or something of which I would put very much trust. The idea in many instances originally, because there's some good ideas that start off with these things, they're just immediately twisted around, was look, you'll bring somebody in from another country as peacekeepers who have no real interest in what's going on there. And their only job is to try and keep the peace, keep the parties apart, allow people to be fed by relief agencies, things like that. Sounds great. It doesn't seem to happen that way anymore. I mean, a lot of the countries that you would think that would be most neutral aren't really excited to send any of their troops in on the part of the UN. I mean, you're not seeing a lot of Norwegian troops participating in these kinds of things, or something that are very far away and not really involved in any of the political aspects of this, or the international political aspects of this directly. The people that want to be involved are just that. They want to be involved. So the whole thing is become just a tool, and not a tool of peace or a place to talk. And I think that was what many people thought. Well, if we have the United Nations, this will be a place for everybody to get and discuss these things, right? And, because that's the left, the normal left, the kind we would argue about in the 1990s or 80s, maybe even the 70s, where, they seem to think that everything could be settled around some sort of conference table if somebody would just sit there and eat yogurt and talk about it. Well, we know that isn't true, but, it's comes many times from a heart that is, more, it's more soft than it is thoughtful. Let's put it that way. But does not have an evil purpose. They just think that's how things will work out. We know that's not how things work out. And most of the time, by drawing things out too long doing that, you're just giving someone else an advantage. That may be sort of a real politic view of these things, but it does seem to be borne out by history. And yeah, that's the idea, but it's rapidly changed. If you go through and look at the positions that the United Nations has taken, how many times it's condemned Israel for doing things versus anybody else? Positions taken on all sorts of other things. It's clearly being controlled by, we would call them far left, but they're not really far left. They're just, usually dictatorships, tyrannies, communist countries, folks that want to be heard because they just want to be heard. It's not a great spot, and we don't really have a methodology of that, because we've said, well, the United Nations is against it, or for it, or whatever. Well, you create this monster, and then you're stuck with explaining why you agree or disagree with it. One of the great quotes came about the United Nations, and I'm maybe paraphrasing a little bit here, from Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a UN representative for the United States before he became a fairly left-wing New York senator, which is really because you had to be that way to get elected in New York. But before that, he had a little more solid on things. He was, a little lefty like Hubert Humphrey, but he got it. He just started leaning the other way when he ran for Senate. But anyway, he once said that, and I think he got up and left the room or something. It was something kind of dramatic. He said, the United States of America will not be lectured to about democracy by petty dictatorships. That's pretty much what he said. I love that. You'd like to think you couldn't disagree with that, but no. We let countries like Iran tell us, how to do human rights, right? North Korea, how to treat your people. We're just nuts in that. That organization needs to be put on a barge and floated out of New York. All right, let's talk about something that is rock solid. And, I like to go back to the basics and the kinds of things that our framers looked at and that have stood for a long time and have never changed. And sometimes when you read some of these writings from long ago, and you realize first, A, how smart these people were, and B, how little has changed in human nature and government, no matter what you want to call it. And it's a great warning to you, and it just brings it all back up. And also some of these guys have managed to sort of summarize it in a way that when you hear it, you go, oh, yeah, that's right. So I thought we would take a moment, and because people, well, you don't want to talk about Aristotle on the radio. I said, of course you want to talk about Aristotle on the radio. I talk about Tacitus all the time on the radio. Now, I may bore them, but some people are nice enough to say they like it or enjoy thinking about it anyway. They may just be nice to me, but I think it's a good thing to do. I mean, if you know just your own generation, you only remain a child of that generation. You have to know the broad sweep of humanity and know how you got here. Now, Aristotle, you may be familiar with him. He was kind of a philosopher. He wrote a lot of things. One of them, he wrote a book on politics. Now, he would have written this about, almost 2,400 years ago, 23 and change, in Greece, of course. And at his symposium, where he would teach the folks of wherever wanted to pay him, of course. I mean, it was a little school there. And they would discuss these ideas and so forth. So this is what he put down. And this is the one that I really find on the mark for us here. And trust me, if you want to go pull Aristotle's Politics out and read it, you folks can read it. Don't let anybody tell you that it's some sort of, long-haired, pointy-headed nonsense. No. It's worth looking at. You may not agree with everything, but your eyes will open about what's been going on in the world for a long time. And then you'll start thinking about, why can these people come up with these ideas that clearly have failed and caused all sorts of problems for at least 2,000-3,000 years? And it's because they don't know. Or if they do know, they think they're smarter than Aristotle. And like I've said before, they're not. Just because you have an iPhone doesn't mean you're smarter than Einstein or Aristotle or Plato or Archimedes or whomever you want to think about. So it's a conceit on our part here. Anyway, he talked about tyranny in this particular part of politics. It's Aristotle's Politics 1314, page number, and it depends on how you translate it, so the page number. It says, "And it is the mark of a tyrant to dislike anyone that is proud or free-spirited, for the tyrant claims for himself alone the right to bear that character. And the man who meets his pride with pride and shows a free spirit robs tyranny of its superiority and position of mastery. Tyrants, therefore, hate the proud as undermining their authority. And it is a mark of a tyrant to have men of foreign extraction," think about this, "rather than citizens as guests at table and companionship, feeling that citizens are hostile, but strangers make no claims against them." There's kind of a reason you have unbridled immigration, if you look at immigration, if you think about that. Broadly speaking, tyranny aims at three things. This is Aristotle speaking. One is to keep its subjects humble, for a humble-spirited man would not plot against anybody. Second, to have them continually distrust one another, for a tyranny is not destroyed until some men come to trust each other, owing to which tyrants also make war on the respectable, as detrimental to their rule, not only because of their refusal to submit to despotic rule, but also because they are faithful to one another and to the other citizens, and do not inform against one another nor against the others. Yeah, I mean, you think about this. How often is the first thing some of these things do when they put a new program is put a snitch line out there, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about. I just, I don't know. And the third is a lack of power for political action. Since nobody attempts impossibilities, so no one will try to put down a tyranny if he has not power behind him. These then are the three aims to which the wishes of tyrants are directed. For all the measures taken by tyrants, one might class under these three principles. Some are designed to prevent mutual confidence among the subjects, others to curtail their power, and others to make them humble-spirited. And it goes on. And there's a lot more in there that is quite revealing. And if you look at that and read it, especially if you think about it a couple of times, see, it's so true. Patriotism is a sense of pride in country. Despots don't want you to have it. They may pretend to have it, but they don't want others to feel like that they have any right to it. And pride in their own accomplishments, well, that's not good, because the only things you should have pride in as accomplishments are those of the collective, be it the state or whatever you want to call it. So it's constantly taking and making men and women and whatever is in between there, I don't know, making them small. The goal of big government, which eventually grows into some sort of tyrannical dictatorship, whatever you want to call it, is to make you small, to make you not that important in the great machine of your own political apparatus. They do that by diminishing you, diminishing your idea that you're proud of yourself, of what you've done, that you're proud of your country, that you're proud of your family, and because you have that pride, you want to make sure things go correctly. And because you have these ties, what do you have? You have trust in people. You know who you can trust. You're tied by bounds of friendship, bounds of community, bounds of family. Do you notice how those constantly are getting tried to be severed? The only collective you're really pushed to is a collective that you do not have any confidence or allegiance to other individuals, but to, once again, the collective, the organization, Antifa, whatever it is, right? Global warming. I mean, that's sort of becoming kind of a religion, right? And so when you think about these things, you see that this is the nature of humanity, and it is the pieces of humanity that the power-hungry are aiming at, because they realize over time, 2,300 years ago, that this is how you control a society. Just think about it. I know you guys are smart, and so was he.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening.
See you next week.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more, and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.